Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I found the video. I want you to listen to this. Okay? I want you to listen good. Okay? Since I have it in my history. It's by Inside Edition.
Hitting home for this stand-up comic. The news that Bob Saget died from a massive head injury is hitting home for this stand-up comic. 51-year-old Heather McDonald was performing for a sold-out crowd when she suddenly became dizzy.
So nice. So nice.
You can hear the sickening thud as her head hits the floor. Her injuries were eerily similar to Saget's: a fractured skull, brain bleed, even black eyes. The big difference, she was taken to the ER.
I have a fracture in my skull and I had some bleeding on the brain. And the trauma for the back of the brain will oftentimes cause two black eyes.
Having suffered similar injuries here, do you think Bob Saget would have lived if he wasn't alone in his hotel room?
If Bob had gone to the hospital, I think he would have lived.
How Bob Saget suffered that one fatal blow to the back of his head remains a mystery. The medical examiner says it was due to a fall backwards. But today, there's a new theory emerging. As Bob Saget returned to his hotel at 2:17 in the morning, it's possible he could have banged his head on the frame of his car or on the lid of his trunk. After all, Bob Saget was 6'5", so you could see how he could hit his head in such a way. There are also several places in his hotel room where he might have struck his head in a slip and fall. A marble table, a wooden desk, shower fittings, or the tile floor.
A fall on any of those surfaces would knock a person unconscious. Okay?
Experts are questioning the autopsy findings today.
There is no hotel room I've ever stayed in that would allow for a fall significant enough to cause this kind of head injury. This is the kind of injury that might occur from a traffic accident, might occur from an assault, might occur from fall down a flight of stairs.
Head trauma specialist Dr. Robert Duarte studied the autopsy report. This wasn't just a little bump on the head, right?
Exactly. There were fractures in the base of the skull, in the occipital region, the temporal region. There was also fractures in the front, above the eye, on both sides of the skull.
So even though we're hearing he hit his head on the back of his head, it caused fractures in 3 places, even the front.
Exactly.
The police investigation is now closed, so the mystery may never be solved.
To me, it sounds like it was murder. I'm sorry. It sounds like murder, and they closed the case. I think they closed it way too early. Something going on here.
There is new information tonight about the death of comedian Bob Saget. The medical examiner's report says he had COVID and heart disease, but that's not how he lost his life. He died from a head injury.
The CBS 3 health reporter Stephanie Stallings here with more on the autopsy that was released today. Stephanie?
Well, Jessica, that autopsy report says it was an accidental fall and head injury that killed Bob Saget. What's not explained is what caused him to fall, but drugs, alcohol, and foul play, they've been ruled out. Bob Saget's family says the comedian, actor, and TV host who died last month accidentally hit the back of his head on something, thought nothing of it, and went to sleep. Medical experts
Does
say
that sound
he may have
right to
suffered
you?
an epidural
If he hit his head on something,
bleeding and swelling
you
in
would
the
be
brain.
outlawed.
How does something like this happen?
It is truly tragic, and it's a rare event.
Dr. Michelle Smith, a neurologist with Mainline Health, says a fatal epidural hematoma usually comes with symptoms like confusion, dizziness, severe headache, drowsiness, and nausea.
If one seeks medical attention in a timely way, often we can reverse any brain damage before it's permanent. Unfortunately for him, it sounds like that head strike was the only injury that he sustained, and potentially he didn't have any other pain, and by the time that he would have had symptoms, he was asleep.
People over age 40 have a higher risk for traumatic brain injury. Blood thinners, including aspirin, are more likely to cause bleeding.
Lots of us hit our head. Lots of us have minor head injuries, sometimes major. So it's scary to think that something like this could happen. This particular tragic situation for him is really a perfect storm, because in a lot of other scenarios, you have a car accident or something where you're having other pain in your body and you're going to get medical care.
The autopsy report says the 65-year-old Saget also had heart disease and COVID when he died. Neither is listed as contributing to his death.
Because he got over it.
And that autopsy report says there were no signs of lung damage that would be linked to COVID. Also, Bob Saget had an enlarged heart and artery disease, but the only cause of death listed on that autopsy report is the head injury. Jessica?
All right, Stephanie, thank you.
I'm sorry, they're spinning it like he died with COVID. No, he did not have COVID. He had COVID, but he got over it. Which they're not saying, because he had a PCR test.
For those new to the channel, my name is Dr. Martin Rutkowski, and I'm an assistant professor of neurosurgery with expertise in brain tumors. Bob Saget tragically passed away 1 month ago at the age of 65. He was found unresponsive in his hotel room in Orlando after a night of stand-up comedy. At the time, the circumstances surrounding his death were unclear, but his family and the chief medical examiner in charge of his autopsy just released his results. He succumbed to something called a subdural hematoma. In today's video, I'll briefly explain what a subdural hematoma is, how they form, and why they can be lethal, and what I think happened to Mr. Saget. I'll also briefly review the surgical options we have if they're caught early enough to be treated. It's important to state that I only have as much information as what was released publicly, and this is my interpretation of the coroner's medical findings. Subdural hematomas are something we see very frequently in neurosurgery. So let's revisit what happened to Mr. Saget. He was found unresponsive in his hotel room by security after family was unable to reach him and he failed to check out. There were no signs of trauma or foul play. Apparently, his left arm was found across his chest, leaving many to incorrectly assume that he had suffered a heart attack. When someone passes away prematurely, we often think of the primary suspects that can cause sudden death: cardiac arrhythmias resulting in cardiac arrest, heart attack, stroke, pulmonary embolism, which is a large blood clot in the lungs, and sometimes metabolic causes. This essentially means death from ingested substances, usually illicit drugs, alcohol, or medication overdoses or side effects. Despite well-documented problems with addiction, Mr. Saget's toxicology analysis did not reveal any evidence of illicit drugs or toxins that contributed to his death. Joshua Stephanie, chief medical examiner in the Orlando counties where Mr. Saget passed away, issued a statement saying, "In consideration of the circumstances surrounding the death and after examination of the body, toxicology analysis, histology, and a respiratory pathogen panel, it is my opinion that the death of Mr. Saget was the result of blunt head trauma. His injuries were most likely incurred from an unwitnessed fall. A toxicology analysis did not reveal any illicit drugs or toxins. The manner of death is accident. Our condolences go out to Mr. Saget's loved ones during this difficult time." So what exactly is blunt head trauma, and what is a subdural hematoma? Let's get into it. A subdural hematoma is a collection of blood that forms between the surface of the brain and the dura, a tissue layer that normally houses and protects the brain. We all have veins that drain from the surface of the brain into the dura above it, and these so-called bridging veins can be quite fragile, especially as we age. When they rip or tear as a result of trauma, the shear force causes blood to pool and expand within the subdural space between the dura and the cortical surface of the brain. As the blood fills this potential space and forms a collection, or hematoma, it can exert dangerous pressure or mass effect on the brain. Intracranial pressure can rise to dangerous levels and cause someone to fall into a coma. Direct pressure from the hematoma can cause brain dysfunction, as can secondary effects from cellular injury and eventually lost blood flow to the brain, as the pressure inside the head overwhelms your heart's ability to push blood past that resistance, resulting in strokes, further brain swelling and injury, and increased pressure. Eventually, patients can fall into a deep coma and then pass away. A number of factors can increase the risk of forming a subdural hematoma. While blood trauma is usually the inciting force, taking blood thinners for other conditions such as irregular heartbeat, prior blood clots, stroke, and for certain implanted medical devices can greatly increase the risk of subdural bleeding and hematoma formation. We also see subdural hematomas more often in older patients. likely from brain atrophy that causes the surface of the brain to shrink away from the dura, and from blood vessels that weaken with aging. Older patients are also more likely to be on blood thinners, further compounding the problem. So what happened to Mr. Saget? The force it takes to cause a subdural hematoma is generally quite significant. As neurosurgeons, we see them most commonly following car accidents, unhelmeted sports or recreational activities, and from direct, significant blows to the head. Generally, the force of these accidents is enough to cause external signs of trauma or injury to the head and scalp, but apparently Mr. Saget did not show any signs of trauma. Now, I don't know his entire medical history, but it certainly makes me wonder if he had other risk factors such as vascular disease or was taking a medication that made it harder for his blood to clot. Generally, the force required to cause a subdural hematoma that results in death is quite significant. It sounds as though Mr. Saget was found in his hotel bed, leading his family and the coroner to conclude that whatever trauma he suffered, he was able to make his way into bed before passing away. A so-called lucid interval like this is more commonly seen with another type of brain bleed known as an epidural hematoma, but can certainly be seen with the type of subdural hematoma that Mr. Saget had. Whatever accident he suffered, the blood likely pooled over a period of time and caused him to slowly slip into a coma and ultimately led to his death. It's also important to note that many subdural hematomas are small and do not require medical or surgical treatment and do not result in death. Only when they become large enough to exert significant pressure on the brain and cause altered consciousness or brain dysfunction such as paralysis or seizures do we worry about performing surgery to remove them. Surgical evacuation of a subdural hematoma is a common neurosurgical procedure. To see what this looks like in person, be sure to check out my prior video demonstrating how we do this in an actual operation. For those who are curious, the steps involve identifying where over the brain a subdural hematoma is, and then making an appropriate incision in the scalp to allow access to the skull overlying that area. A craniotomy, or opening in the skull, is then performed by first drilling several nickel-sized holes into the skull. A special side-cutting drill is then used to connect the dots, and a skull flap is elevated off the dura for covering of the brain. When the dura is cut open and flapped upward, the hematoma is immediately apparent. This is removed while taking care not to disturb the brain underneath, and we always look for any veins or other blood vessels that may be actively bleeding and causing the hematoma. When we find these, they are cauterized. If the brain is not severely injured, we close the dura, replace the bone flap with titanium metal plates and screws, and sew the scalp back together. In instances where the brain is severely damaged and too swollen to reclose the dura, we leave the bone flap off to allow the brain to swell during the time of the injury. If the brain swells against a bone flap that has been replaced prematurely, this can cause dangerous increases in intracranial pressure and further injury. We can always go back later when a patient is recovered to replace their bone flap. I hope you found this helpful. For more brain-related content and insights into the world of neurosurgery, be sure to check out the rest of my channel. If you like what you see, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and welcome back to the channel. For those who are new here, my name is Dr. Martin Rutkowski, and I'm an assistant professor of neurosurgery with expertise in brain tumors. In today's follow-up video to the one I released yesterday on the initial autopsy results in Bob Saget's tragic death, I'll discuss new details that have emerged regarding the severity of his injuries. Initial reports indicated that Mr. Saget entered his hotel room at 2:17 a.m. on January 9th, and then was found by security the next day after failing to respond to his family or check out of his hotel room. When they entered his room, there were no signs of foul play. His room was orderly, with items on the nightstand, closet, and bathroom, and he was found in bed with his left arm across his chest, with no signs of trauma. The chief medical examiner's report concluded that Mr. Saget suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards and struck the posterior aspect of his head. The manner of death is accident. But the story seems to have changed significantly, and in my opinion, the nature of his injuries do not support this orderly explanation of a simple accident. As of now, the afternoon of February 11th, Mr. Saget's further released autopsy results reveal more specific, severe, and extensive injuries to his head that contradict the initial reports.
Exactly.
Mr. Saget suffered abrasion of the posterior scalp, subgaleal hemorrhage underlying the abrasion, linear fracture of the base of the skull, combinated fractures of the roofs of the orbits involving the bilateral frontal bone, bilateral partial periorbital ecchymoses, subdural hematoma, subarachnoid hemorrhage, Contrecoup contusions involving the bilateral frontal lobes and bilateral temporal lobes. Now let's break those down so that you all understand how severe and extensive they are. I'll leave it up to you to agree or disagree whether or not the story we have around his death explains the significance of these injuries. An abrasion or scratch of the posterior scalp certainly makes sense. A subgaleal hematoma refers to a blood collection below the galea, the third layer of the scalp, which possesses 5 total tissue layers. In a strange coincidence, I just released a video last week explaining how this type of injury occurred in UFC 247 as the result of severe and direct blows to the head. I'll link that video here. A linear fracture of the base of the skull is a type of injury that only comes with severe head trauma. The base of the skull is deep within the head, protected either by the outside of the skull, the calvarium, or by the muscles and tissue layers of the upper neck. The force required to generate a basilar skull fracture is very significant and not typically seen with accidental ground-level falls.
See?
Combinated fractures of the roofs of the orbits involving the bilateral frontal bone further attest to the incredible force his head must have sustained. A combinated fracture is one in which the bone is broken into multiple smaller pieces, rather than a single fracture, and this appears to have occurred in the bilateral orbits, or the bony housing that surrounds the eyeballs. The frontal bone helps make up the roof of the orbits, and so concurrent injuries make sense. So far, this pattern of injury suggests that he suffered forceful blows to the front and back of his skull.
Yep.
And the bilateral partial periorbital ecchymoses, or bruises around the eyes, are consistent with his orbital injuries, in addition to the basilar skull fracture. We frequently see bruising in this area from direct trauma to the orbits or due to a deep skull fracture, a feature termed raccoon eyes. I explained subdural hematoma in my first video on his death, a blood collection that forms between the surface of the brain and the dura, its protective outermost covering. While the dura forms the outermost covering of the brain, there are actually 2 additional layers to the meninges that help protect the brain, known as the arachnoid, a transparent veil of tissue just superficial to the cortical surface, and the pia, a very thin membrane tightly adherent to the brain tissue itself. Blood that forms beneath the arachnoid as a response to trauma is common and is called traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage. Some of you may also have heard of subarachnoid hemorrhage that can form when an aneurysm ruptures, because the major blood vessels that feed the brain pass through the subarachnoid space. And finally, Mr. Saget had Contrecoup injuries involving the bilateral frontal and temporal lobes. Contrecoup injury refers to the secondary injury caused by a ricochet phenomenon. When something injures the skull and brain, the force transmits into the brain and causes its opposite side to crash against the inside of the skull, generating further injury. For example, head trauma to the right side of the skull would transmit into the right temporal lobe and then push the brain against the left inside aspect of the skull, injuring the left temporal lobe. These injuries are also commonly seen when the brain undergoes high impact under significant speed or force. So there we have it. These are not injuries caused by a bump to the head or simple head trauma, nor would I expect something this severe to be caused merely by blood thinners or vascular disease. These are incredibly serious and severe signs that major head trauma has been suffered. In my career and personal experience, I've only seen injuries like this with high-speed accidents, such as motorcycle crashes, serious car accidents, or falls from great height. I have no idea what happened to Mr. Saget, but none of these injuries are in line with the orderly scene encountered by security when they first found him.
He even
So there we
said
have
it's
it.
murder.
These are not injuries caused by
See,
a bump
this
to the
guy
head
even
or simple head
questioning it.
trauma, nor would I expect something this severe to be caused merely by blood thinners or vascular disease. These are incredibly serious and severe signs that major head trauma and traumatic brain injury has been suffered. In my career and personal experience, I've only seen injuries like this with high-speed accidents such as motorcycle crashes, serious car accidents, or falls from great height. Now, I have no idea what happened to Mr. Saget, but none of these injuries are in line with the orderly scene encountered by security when they first found him. The story initially released made it seem like a simple accident had caused Mr. Saget's subdural hematoma. While I have seen several examples of subdural hematoma caused without a clear history of recent head trauma, these so-called spontaneous subdural hematomas are probably occurring in patients who don't remember suffering head trauma. It takes some sort of force, even in patients with risk factors such as blood thinner use or vascular disease, to cause a subdural hematoma. The smallest accident or head strike may be enough, but there should be some antecedent event that caused it. That's why this story makes less and less sense as further details are released. This was not just a simple subdural hematoma.
Nope.
While that may have been the specific injury that caused his death, the collection of severe injuries indicates a similarly severe mechanism of injury. I just can't understand how a simple fall backwards could cause this. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
So what do you think? If you have further details on his autopsy results, please let me know in the comments below. Something tells me that there will be more to this story as time passes, so stay tuned. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next video.
The cause of actor Bob Saget's death has been determined as head trauma. Saget hit the back of his head on something and must have thought nothing of it. And he later died in his Florida hotel room. The night before Saget died, the 65-year-old performed a comedy show in Jacksonville. And when his family didn't hear from him, they requested a wellness check. And on January 9th, police found him dead, lying on his back. Medical examiners say there was no evidence of drug use or foul play.
That being said, there's still a lot of questions about the exact cause and manner, even if there was a blow to the head and no drugs or alcohol were involved. Again, we still don't know exactly what happened and what could have happened and what could have therefore been prevented. So to start talking a little bit more about this in very general terms, happy to have Dr. Mark Alberts, the chief of neurology at Hartford Hospital, joining us this morning. Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you today?
Great, Tim. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, and we always want to just impress upon our viewers that, of course, we have no connection to this case. There's a lot of information we don't know. But why don't we start there? What other questions do you have with your experience in neurology based on the little that we do know about his death?
Right. I would want to know, as a physician, what other medical issues Bob may have had. For example, was he taking blood thinners? Did he have a prior history of strokes or falls, things like that? Something that would have increased what we call our index of suspicion that there may be something worrisome going on. Because we all bump our heads a little bit every day, every week, and we don't want to alarm people that they need to go to the hospital with every little bump on the head. And again, his case raises more questions than answers at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good point, Jim. You don't want to cause undue risk. But I do want to talk about those sort of bolt of lightning cases. What does happen in the rare cases that maybe somebody bumps their head, otherwise thinks nothing of it, but winds up suffering a fatal injury that doesn't make itself known for a few hours?
Yeah, I mean, you can have damage to the blood vessels in your brain from banging your head. And then if those blood vessels get torn or squinched too much, it can cause bleeding in the brain, particularly if the person or if the patient has another risk factor for bleeding, like they're taking a blood thinner for another disease, something like that. But again, his case is very unusual because that type of bleeding in the brain usually would occur and get worse over many hours, if not even days. So to have him go to bed being what we presume is normal, and then he never wakes up again, that's distinctly unusual in my opinion.
Okay, at least that is something. And doctor, as you were saying that, just got an email in from a viewer named Steve Devaney who said, I'm on blood thinners. They told me if I fall or hit my head, I had to go to the ER. Is that general good medical advice? Or more specifically, are there certain symptoms you should be looking out for when you or somebody else hits their head that says, okay, we need to get checked out?
Yeah, great question, Tim. So not everybody who hits their head has the same type of injury, right? If you're in a car accident going 60 miles an hour and you hit your head on the windshield, that's a high impact injury. That's something very worrisome. On the other hand, if you just very gently walk into a door and, you know, it lasts a second and there's no real injury, that's sort of at the different end of the spectrum. Having said that, I think you need a big dose of common sense. And it's always a good idea in those cases where patients are on a blood thinner for them to call their primary care physician, explain what happened, explain how they're feeling, and then let them parse things out, because we don't, again, want everybody running to the ED every time they bump their head.
And you got into this a little bit before. In terms of a time window that you want to look for before you can say, okay, I think everything's all right, how long would it normally take before you would be reasonably assured somebody did not suffer something inside their head that would cause more attention after a head injury?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the longer you go after a head injury, the more confident you are, especially, and this is the key thing, if the patient is normal. They're not having a bad headache. They're awake and alert. They're walking and talking normally. Because that's what we look for in the hospital, for in terms of signs that things are going wrong. They have a worsening headache, a slurred speech, they're sleeping, they have weakness or numbness. Those are all worrisome symptoms. And in that case, then you should go to the hospital right away and seek medical care.
It does sound like a lot of common sense will go a long, long way with a lot of this, Doctor. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and give us some of your knowledge. We do appreciate it.
I mean, it tells you right there, and that even the people there interviewing are questioning the autopsy report, saying that this is not just from a normal fall. Something fishy here. They're questioning it. All these doctors are questioning it, of how he got this bad from a fall. Please, someone, we need to keep pushing this. His family needs to push the autopsy reports, question the autopsy reports, because something happened in that hotel. Because even the one doctor said that he questions the orderly room. And I mean, like I said, the person who murders someone doesn't want to get caught, or makes the room orderly, make it look like nothing has happened. Something happened in that room. I'm telling you, I have a gut feeling something bad happened in that room. People need to get them to reopen this case real fast, because no one dies just from a fall like that. By that hitting their head at the point where he hit his. Unless someone hit him over the head with a baseball bat. And the one doctor even said that he was even hit in the front of the face. He could have gotten into a fight with the person, and the person was punching him and stuff like that. I mean, something happened. Something happened. I want to see what it was. I would have loved to see video footage of him entering the hotel at 2 a.m. If he was stumbling, if he was, how he was when he entered that hotel room. Because I know there's cameras in the hallways. I know there's cameras in the lobbies. I mean, where is this footage? Why are they quickly wrapping it up, saying it was just an accident? Blah, blah, blah. Why ain't anyone questioning how he got these injuries? Where he got these injuries? If he hit his head in the bathroom, there would be blood on the linoleum bathroom floor, because he would spit up blood. There'd be blood somewhere. If it hit a head on the counter or something, there would be blood on the counter. Okay? Why wasn't that investigated? Why wasn't that photographed? I want to know if that was even investigated. People want to know how exactly this man, who was healthy as a horse, other than being CV positive in the past, not now, in the past, and having an enlarged heart, and having anxiety problems, could die with such a blunt force trauma to the head, when there was no blood to be found. I want to know why they didn't investigate this further to make sure that it was an accidental. You know what I'm saying? They didn't photograph the bedroom, the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Look at security tapes. I mean, I would have been very thorough with someone as famous as Bob Saget. People know who Bob Saget is. He is a well-known figure in Hollywood. Or was when he was alive. Say his name and people know who he is. Oh, Danny from Full House. Oh, he makes fun of her videos. People need to start pushing to get this open again real quick and get to the real bottom of what happened that night. And be thorough. These half-assed way investigating death, of someone's death is not going to solve a crime. And we all know that California cops are corrupted. Because look at what happened when Biggie, Tupac. I mean, I just want people to investigate it. That's all. I'm doing good. I'm about to go to sleep. You can tell I'm tired. Cindy's asleep. My daughter. And happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there. I just feel sorry for his family having to deal with this. I really do. But I really think it's either homicide or murder or something. There's something fishy about his death. Very, very fishy. I know who Try Hard Boy is. It's my daughter's boyfriend. I will when she wakes up. He's asleep. Let her sleep. You're gonna see it tomorrow, hon. Alright? Ugh. So, please, I'd be all for his death to be investigated very much closer. And I'm sorry for the breaking video because of Cindy's boyfriend over there. Or wherever the chat is. Good night, Devin. Well, I'll let myself get some sleep. Hey, y'all get some sleep. But question reality. Question Hollywood's deaths lately. And see what they're saying is the truth. Because I don't trust what they say anymore when it comes to celebrities. Hey, Ray. How you doing? Music biz Marty. Hey, you guys are. No. It was a skull fracture. Like I said in the first one and the second one. It was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, which fractured his skull and the front of his face. He did have CV, but he had it in the past. and he had an enlarged heart, and he was also on benzodiazepines and Klonopin. It says it in the autopsy because it went into detail on his skull. And the only way that this person, that Bob, could have get that is either being in a car accident, a fall from a great height, or I do believe that, Agent Scully. I do believe that. He knew something. I'm starting to really believe that too. I really do. Because this was not your normal death here. I mean, in my opinion, something went down. He said something that someone didn't like, or was saying something that they didn't like, and he was killed. Because every neurologist at the news reports saying that this is not an ordinary fall death. That it looked like he was either in a car accident, great fall, or someone hit him over the head with a baseball bat. Or punched him like he was in an MMA fight. And I think his wife and family and friends need to push for this not to be officially closed. It needs to be investigated further. And if they don't, I believe there's something fishy going on. I mean, like I said, was something fishy going on with Tupac and Biggie back in the day. Because why hasn't his murder? I mean, they came up with a lot of suspects that were involved in it, and yet no arrests. I don't know. I really don't know. I have to look in to find out where he was at the time. I can understand it. I mean, classic games, Canada. I really would understand it, but I don't know. I really don't know. Because he was the only person out of the Full House that wasn't really getting the fame that he deserved. But I can't put the blame on anybody. Like, if it was him or not. Because the fact that I wasn't there, I mean, it could be jealousy, but you don't know. You really don't know. Because Jesse became real big after the Full House. Bob became famous. The kids became famous. I mean, Kimmy, the girl who played Kimmy, she had her, mid-level fame. Let's just say that. She wasn't as big as Bob or Jesse, And Lori Langman or whatever her name is, she has her own little scandal with the college thing. Yeah, his career really did fade after Full House. But you don't know if he just wanted it that way. If he didn't want to be in the spotlight, you don't know. You know what I'm saying? He could have been a fanatical fan, like I said in the first video. It could be some radical, person with an agenda, a hired hit, or you don't know. I mean, to me, it sounds kind of fishy to me. It really does. It really does. This to me, it was not accidental. There's a lot of Hollywood, deaths that I question, like Tupac, Biggie, Brittany Murphy. I hate to say it, Michael Jackson. I mean, Elvis. I mean, a lot of these. I mean, I even looked up Amy Winehouse, and I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there was a video that I saw years ago where they interviewed a neighbor and they heard weird things going on the day of her death. Take it as a grain of salt. I mean, just to me, just Hollywood has become weirder and sicker, and I just don't know. I don't know. But I doubt that it was Dave Coulier. I doubt it. Even though he did have a past with Alanis Morissette and cheated on her with someone else, or broke up with her or whatever for someone else. It was a shaky thing there. But I doubt that he would do murder. Yeah. In my opinion. And Candace has her own Lifetime thing, podcast and everything going on. So she'd be too busy for that. In my opinion. I really doubt that Dave Coulier would do it. Because he doesn't seem like the type that really wanted the fame. But I'll look into where he was on that day. And as of right now, let's see. January 9th. Let's see. Was Dave Let's see. Let's see here. Years before. Let's see. Bob Saget and Dave became friends with each other years before they started working together on the set Full House. The first ever encounter just happened to be in Michigan. M Live talked to Bob Saget while he was in town for a stand-up comedy show a few years ago. The America's Funniest Home Video host told us that the story of the first time he and Coulier met. I met Dave when he was 17 at a bar in Detroit called Delta Lady that had a comedy night. I saw Dave there when I was 21, and after that, Dave stayed on my couch in LA. He got us an Eli's Brothers commercial. In it, Dave and I were sneaking into the cellar bar. I'm even wearing a Vikings hat. It's absolutely pathetic. Saget was found dead, blah, blah, blah. It says that Saget was on stand-up tour and had performed a previous, blah. I love tonight's show at PV Concert Hall in Jacksonville. Appreciative audience. Thanks again to Tim Watkins for opening. I had no idea I had a 2-hour set tonight. I'm happily addicted again to this. Dave and Saget and Coulier worked Full House together from 87 through 95, and again on Fuller House from 2016 to 2020. The two were close friends and often referred to each other as brothers. My heart is broken. I love you, Bob. Your forever brother, Dave. Dave Coulier wrote on Twitter in reaction to Bob's death. Bob also had another connection to Michigan. His father grew up in Detroit. While Bob never lived in Motor City, he said he spent a lot of time in the area over the years and had a lot of friends in the state. There's just something about the audience in Detroit that I've always felt connected to. Detroit is different. I literally was there twice a year for 15 years. So I doubt it was Bob. Because, Bob lived on the couch. Lived on Bob's couch. They grew close. But that's all I really wish and pray and everything that Bob's death be investigated further. Because this is not an open and cut, case. Not by the least. And I would like to know where he hit his head. If it did hit his head, why didn't anyone take more evidence? It's just something's fishy here. Something reeks in Denmark. And this is message saying happy Valentine's Day and hug your family close.